Welcome to the Sensible Socialist Podcast, a podcast for the rational left.
We need to unite and work together if we're all going to get through this. Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero.
How heroic he comes from.
If Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez.
oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
Welcome to this episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gustafson. And in this episode, we're going to have a conversation that I think a lot of leftists are wondering. With the 2020 election approaching, the question is, should I vote for Joe Biden? I mean, we're not going to vote for Trump, right? But can we really vote for Joe Biden? I think a lot of people are having this conversation. DSA has been talking about potentially talking about a vote for Howie Hawkins and the Green Party in safe states. So my friend and comrade Aaron Firouz asked me if we wanted to have a conversation because he thinks, well, you should vote for Joe Biden. And I've been pretty vocal on this podcast that I don't think so and would not personally vote for Joe Biden. So we decided, let's have the conversation that a lot of people are having and let people hear what that conversation's like and choose for themselves where they want to go. So without further ado, here's my conversation about voting for Joe Biden with Aaron Firouz. Aaron, thanks for coming on the Sensible Socialist Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I just want you to do the introduction part of this. So just give a bit of a background in terms of sort of who you are, but I think in some ways the interesting part is how you came to where you are in terms politically, how you would, I guess, define what you are politically and organizations you're a part of or anything like that. So what do you, give us the intro.
Sure. I'm a DC area, sometimes activist. I've been on a bit of a hiatus recently, but I've been involved with several of the groups here, probably most prominently DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. Politically, I would probably peg myself as a pretty strong Democratic Socialist in terms of practical politics. Ideologically, I'm probably closer to anarcho-communism, but I recognize that, that's a little out there.
Mm-hmm.
I've been involved for about 5 years now and kind of always been a progressive, never really given it much thought, but kind of a 2015 and 2016, seeing the things that were happening. I think like a lot of people, I woke up and realized that, we need to be more involved and more aware of what's happening. And then with Trump getting elected, I definitely kind of went all in. And that's kind of why I'm here to have this conversation with you today.
All right. So you reached out to me and basically wanted to have a discussion because of, I think, things I've said or what I've been pretty not hidden, I guess, about is that I've said many times, and I'll say it again, I will not vote for Joe Biden. That is to say, obviously, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Obama the second time. I didn't vote. I voted for the Socialist Equality Party the first time I ever voted for president. So for me personally, the vote for president is like this. It has this double meaning in the fact that it's this really super important thing that I take seriously, and it's also this bunch of bullshit that I don't actually care about. It's a kind of double thing to hold those two ideas at the same time, but I think they're both true. And so when it comes to looking at 2020, this was the chance to be able to do two things at once, which was to beat the shit out of Donald Trump in an election and to elect the most progressive candidate who's ever run for president seriously, that could actually get things done, which was Bernie Sanders. And for the Democratic Party to have essentially destroyed another very important social movement, one that I felt at least a part of, to me, does one not obligate me to vote for their candidate? And two, in some ways makes me not want to, like, would not want to vote, whether it was Joe Biden or Mayor Pete or Kamala Harris or any of the Democrats who wasn't Bernie Sanders. For me, it was Bernie or bust. And it was Bernie or bust for me in 2016, and it's Bernie or bust for me in 2020. And Bernie busted. So I'm bust, and like, so I mean, part of me might just vote for Bernie because I'm legitimately Bernie or bust, but I want to hear. There's a number of different things we can go in terms of my ability to do that. In some ways, I live in Washington D.C. It's not in any way a swing state. It's going to go 99% for Joe Biden. So it's very safe for me to cast a quote unquote throwaway vote, the one that I know won't actually, be towards the legitimate election that is between two people. But so that being said, even if I was in a swing state, even if I was back in Minnesota, which I think one could legitimately call a swing state in this election, I still wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. Like, I mean, I wouldn't, in a very extreme way. I mean, I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden if a lot of people were going up against him, because I think Donald Trump is one of the most dangerous people who's ever been president of the United States. But I think that Joe Biden would be among the most dangerous people who would be president. I really do. So we could get into that, but I'm curious to hear your first reaction to that diatribe.
Yeah. So first of all, I get it. I think that what you're describing is a very common sentiment. I mean, I've definitely seen it across kind of, left Twitter and progressive Twitter and things that, I think people are disappointed. They don't want to reward the Democratic Party for their misdeeds. I recognize that Joe Biden is not, I'm not in any way endorsing Joe Biden as a candidate. So that's not going to happen. But it's also interesting that I think, you kind of described that you don't really take kind of electoral politics, or at least presidential elections, to be particularly significant. But you also do recognize the value of not having Donald Trump anymore. And I think that's kind of where the issue is. I think like essentially my entire argument for this, of trying to discuss this with you, is that, like, yeah, the Democrats suck. Joe Biden pretty much sucks. I don't think that it's an endorsement, but I think that it has to be an indictment against Donald Trump and everything that's happened in the last 4 years for us to go out and resoundingly defeat him, to give him no chance of re-election, because it's still very much a possibility. You've said so yourself. I mean, yeah, his poll numbers are down and everything, but that's never stopped
one
him
terrorist
before.
attack and he's back in business.
Right. I mean, the fascist, occupations of cities and everything is enough to discourage people from voting. Having progressives that kind of refuse to vote or do protest votes and things like that, it's definitely enough to tip the scales back in his favor and have it be a re-election. And I think that would be a vindication of everything that he's done over the last 4 years. It'll basically validate and say, look, America chose me twice. There was a lot of noise, and the fake news attacked everything I did, but ultimately people elected me again. So despite all of that, and I do want to kind of talk about the Democrats and kind of robbing Bernie of the nomination as well. But despite all of that, I think it is important for us to do, at a bare minimum, what we can to just reject the Trump presidency, to reject everything that he's done, the chaos, the insanity, the slide into fascism that we've seen over the last 4 years, inarguably.
Yeah, I mean, so I do recognize the sort of slide to fascism. I think that fascism won't come, I think, with Donald Trump. I think it will come with whoever comes after Donald Trump if he is reelected. So I do see the danger. I think the danger of neoliberalism is not on par with fascism, but it is honestly for me a close second. That the only thing worse than worldwide war and brutal repression against dissidents is the I guess raping of the rest of the world by doing that kind of thing, out of sight, out of mind, from the people that benefit from it. And I think that Joe Biden and the new Democratic Party since Bill Clinton represent fascism for them, and you know, I don't know even what for us, the failure, the like removal of the New Deal and all these kinds of things. I mean, I just think that the Democratic Party, a lot of what I've also talked about on this podcast is the absolute dire need for a third party that is a more left party that would be able to have a platform that would be to the left of the Democratic Party and legitimately caring about the actual issues. So not like the unity. I don't know if you've seen the unity suggestion, you know, of like a center right and center left, like between the two parties. No, it needs to be to the left of the Democratic Party, because that's what every other legitimate country has, and that's what in some ways helps stabilize situations when they start going one way or the other. When there's a rightward movement in France towards Marie Le Pen, you have the Gilets jaunes. So I mean, I think there's counterweights in a way that there isn't counterweights in America, and we desperately need that.
Right. So
giving the Democratic Party the vote is like, I do recognize that there isn't a party that you could vote for right now that is that part. I mean, the closest thing you have is the Green Party, and okay, I guess you could vote for the Green Party. I mean, maybe I'll vote for the Green Party. I mean, they've acknowledged like a socialism. They've adopted, you know, democratic socialism as part of their party platform, and so it's a legitimate vote, I think, to vote for the Green Party. It is no different to me than voting for Bernie in some ways. It is a protest vote, but I think there is an irrationality to thinking that an individual vote matters. And so for me, right, on the individual level, when it comes to the importance I attach to the act of voting and the act of not voting for one of the two major candidates because I genuinely don't agree with them, is to me a somewhat like an almost sacred kind of activity. Like, it is my one chance to actually have an effect because it is my one individual vote, but I'm one individual vote, and I've never seen an election and never will see an election that goes down to one. So this is the whole, like, I think wrongly attributed, but usually attributed to Stalin quote, where one person's death is a tragedy, but a million is just a statistic.
Right.
Statistic. So like for the individual, for me, my casting of the protest vote is a kind of fuck you to the system in the way that the system gives me to try to participate, to try to legitimize the illegitimate rule that I see in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And so I just don't have, in some ways, that strategic approach to my individual vote, in terms of that my vote needs to add to the pile that says fuck you to the pile of shit that's currently in the office. Like, but I do get that. I don't misunderstand that that's a good reason in some ways to vote for Joe Biden. It's not a good enough reason for me to vote for Joe Biden, because, and maybe this is juvenile or naive or something, but the ability to stick my middle finger up to the system, to bite the hand that feeds in some ways, is one of my resistance type political activities, which has basically been the totality of my political activities. So for me it feels weird to protest on the street and organize, you know, legal and illegal political activities in order to gain certain kinds of goals, and then to kind of say, but when I have to make the real decision, the voting decision, the political decision that matters, I gotta really, you know, play within the system and kind of play the cards that you're dealt. And so again, and my vote doesn't matter at the end of the day. So like I have the privilege in some ways, not just because I live in DC, but because we live in a constitutional republic that doesn't, like, where a single person's vote doesn't fucking matter. And the overwhelming amount of people in the country don't vote. So your vote really doesn't matter, because even if it's adding to the pile, it's adding to a pile that is still a minority pile against I don't give a fuck, which I think is an indictment of the whole system. And I'd rather be part of the I don't give a fucks or fuck you than to say, this system is legitimate, let me play. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, full disclosure, I have felt that way for most of my life. I have not voted in most elections for that very reason. I don't want to legitimize a system that I fundamentally disagree with. I don't want to have to make the decision between, you know, the lesser of two evils. So
is it Trump that Trump is so bad that, like, is that, I mean, is it coming from that? The shock of 2016 kind of coming back?
I think, I mean, like, maybe as I get older, I just become a little wiser. Maybe I kind of think about the practicality of it. The question is, if Trump wins, what does that do to our progressive agenda? How does that help us? And my answer is that it absolutely wouldn't. We would be 4 years further into shit. As I said, he would be empowered and validated in everything he's done. It would get even more chaotic. And in 2024, we're still not going to have a viable candidate. It's still going to be the Democrats versus the Republicans. Even if, you know, we do get the third party that's far to the left and they start building power, they're not going to be ready in 2024 to have any effect. So we're going to be stuck with the same decision at that point anyway. I think it's important to essentially stop the bleeding in 2020, to at least, you know, be able to stuff some dirt in the wound and stop the critical bleeding that we're seeing under the Trump administration, under the Republican-led agenda, to be able to give us a chance. I'm not saying the Democrats are going to fix anything. I think it's important. It's critical that we all of us collectively go out November 4th, the day after the election, and just start organizing and pushing further for, you know, the leftist progressive agenda that we want. But I also think that these kinds of things will become significantly harder if Trump were to win again. I mean, like I said, we've seen it. He's cracking down on protests and all of these things. And then in large part, they're just for show. I agree with you that I don't think fascism will fully take effect under Trump. I think the first couple of years, everyone was kind of afraid of that. And then we kind of saw how inept he is and just incompetent. And we're like, oh, well, he's a wannabe dictator. But I think he's had enough practice at it that he's kind of figuring out the ways to kind of circumvent the judicial system. He's proven over the last 4 years that, you know, our checks and balances, the faith in the institutions, all of these things mean nothing. He has run rampant and done anything he wants for the last 4 years and gotten no reprimand. He's gotten a slap on the wrist. He has an asterisk next to his name. But who gives a shit? He's still president and he's still doing what he wants. So I think these things are really dangerous. I think that they are enough for me to concede that it is important to make that vote as a bare minimum, not as a solution, but just to cauterize a wound and to get back out there and be able to fight to advance the agenda further on. I think it's a practical minimum viable action to take.
Yeah, so again, like I will always I'm just gonna like lay this preface out. Like I agree and understand that perspective, but sometimes you cauterize the wound and sometimes you cut the fucking limb off. And I think for me, I'm really sick and tired of business as usual. And I don't like Trump's version of not business as usual, but I think it exposes everything that needs to be exposed. I think it exposes the ineptitude of the Democratic Party. I mean, you have Donald Trump as president, who is engaged in criminal activity basically daily, and you impeach him for trying to fuck with Ukraine stuff and trying to fuck with American hegemony in Ukraine. I mean, this is the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was given a fucking report by Bob Mueller that said, I'm a fucking Justice Department dude. I can't indict the sitting president, but you know who can? Congress. So he obstructed justice, and you impeached Bill Clinton for that. So impeach him. Here you go. I'm willing to testify. And the Democrats let Trump and William Barr say they won. They're exposing everything that is already corrupt about Washington, D.C. And I agree, causing a lot of harm and havoc. But I think if you're looking at the ability and assistance this election is going to have for leftist organizing, Trump winning would do us way more favors than I think you're thinking. I think you remember you got energized and it was like a holy fuck moment. And and I think a lot of people, it was my birthday. It was November 8th, 2016, my birthday. And I was like, I remember saying, holy fuck, because I was pretty surprised. And I didn't know exactly what it meant. But like the Women's March, was like a few days later or like a week later or something like that. And it was fucking huge, but it went nowhere. There were like hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Washington, D.C. that could have taken over the fucking government if it were properly organized. And all everybody did was mull around and give high five to cops and stuff. So for me, like, I saw this massive wave, but no way to funnel it because the Democratic Party was still there going, we're the resistance. They can't lose in 2020 and claim to be anything. If Joe Biden loses in 2020, the Democratic Party dies. It can't go on. It cannot survive being defeated by Donald Trump twice. Like, then it's not the candidate. Then it's not Hillary Clinton. It's the Democrat, right? And they, what would possibly happen? The old guard of the Democratic Party would not have any idea what to do. And a whole new group of people would come up and either fundamentally change the Democratic Party or leave it. And that's exactly what we need to have happen. So, again, I understand exactly what you're talking about, and it is a gaping wound that needs either cauterizing or amputation. And I understand cauterizing it because maybe that's the right move. But I think you'd have what we had in 2016 times 1,000 if Donald Trump gets reelected. Everybody goes, holy fuck, we need to really do something. And the Democrats are not going to be able to do it, so let's go start this new party today. But if Joe Biden kicks the shit out of Donald Trump, then who wins? The Democrats. The Democrats come riding in on a white fucking horse with Joe Biden's senile ass on top of it, saying, yeehaw, look at us, we defeated, we are the resistance. And everybody takes a huge sigh of relief and stops going to DSA meetings and starts going to work. And the exploitation continues, and the neoliberal model gets reasserted, and everybody, including fucking Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson and all these two-wit douchebag fucks that are in control of the world right now, are going to all go, oh, thank God. We're going to go back to the neoliberal order that we all benefit from. And we're going to go back to fucking the same people who got fucked during Donald Trump, for sure, but who are going to get fucked under Joe Biden. I don't fundamentally see what the actual harm is going to, the delta of harm that's going to happen between Donald Trump's 4 more years and Joe Biden's 4 more years, given what is going to have to happen in reaction to Donald Trump's election, I think is very, very small. You're going to have a lot of people who are going to go, fuck that. We're not going to deal with 4 more years of him, and he's going to get impeached again. And there's no, like, there's going to be some fucking thing that he does during the election or something like that. Something he's probably doing right now that is a completely impeachable offense, and you could impeach him. But you would be able to impeach him only from the third party that would massively get elected in the next midterm election, the first midterm election of Donald Trump's presidency, the second term of his presidency. You would have a massive third-party sweep of, I think, even Republican districts that would fundamentally change America, because it would be a left-oriented party that wouldn't pussyfoot around, that would vote to impeach Donald Trump, and would hopefully have enough seats in the Senate to be able to kick them to Rashida, or Tlaib, right? Tlaib, and to get the motherfucker out of there. So, like, I don't know, man. I get what you're saying. I'm just not sure. where we disagree is how much fuel Donald Trump's reelection is going to put on the fire. And for me, I think it's a lot of fuel, and I think for you, it's almost an extinguishing effect. And I'm wondering why.
Because I think at some point outrage just becomes despair. I think at some point I'm speaking from personal experience. This has been my kind of spectrum that I've ping-ponged through for the last 4 years is, you see it happen and you go, holy shit, we just elected Donald Trump. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, he had essentially half the vote. Half of the people that chose to vote chose Donald Trump. And then you try to justify it and you go, okay, well, they voted for him for this. And you try to sympathize and empathize and try to understand the reasons that they voted for him. But then after a while, you kind of become contemptuous. You get filled with disdain when you look at the people that continue to support him over the last 4 years and everything he's done. I could rattle on all of the things he's done, but I think that speaks for itself. And to see him win again, to see your country choose him again, if he were to win, I don't think it would re-energize anyone. I think we would just be exasperated. We would just give up. We would lose whatever faith we had in America as a country. We would say, well, I guess my countrymen are all fucking idiots, and maybe this country's not worth saving. That's something that I've grappled with a lot over the last couple of years. I mean, like I said, I really haven't been actively organizing, and being out of it has definitely made me kind of reevaluate whether I really want to be in the struggle or not. It's just exhaustion. You get this, especially those of us that do organize get burnt out. And then you kind of look and you go, well, what am I really fighting for when half of the country votes for Donald Trump and keeps supporting him and keeps going to his rallies and keeps refusing to wear masks in the face of an epidemic just to stick it to the other half? Like, what are we really fighting for? So that's what I mean. I think that if he were to get reelected, we are vindicating him. We are saying, yeah, the last 4 years, not so bad. Let's try another 4. And I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think that will energize people the way that the 2016 election did. I think most people will effectively either just give up or, I'm sure many will keep fighting, but I don't think it's going to have any kind of a shock effect like it did in 2016.
But Joe Biden getting elected is not going to have that energizing effect either.
I understand, but again, that's where it just comes down to harm reduction. I mean, that's what I mean. Is it for us to have expected the Democrats to allow Bernie to get the nomination is naive at best, right? Bernie was never a Democrat. There's no reason to think that the Democrats would allow him to be their nominee. It's just, that's a reality of it. And if he didn't get the nomination, it's because collectively we, progressives and leftists, did not do enough to change enough minds. And I'm including myself in that, in the fact that I did not go out and knock doors for Bernie. I didn't go out and canvass. I didn't try to spread that message. I just kind of hoped he would get the election. And I think a lot of people were in that boat. They were like, oh yeah, he's doing pretty good. He's leading in some polls. I think he's going to get it. And we got a little complacent and we let it slip away. And it's completely expected. Of course, he's going to disrupt the entire system that the Democrats and the Republicans believe in. I agree with you when you say that they're two sides of the same coin, but one side of that coin is covered in plutonium right now. And I think that at the very least, we should flip it over before we fight to eliminate the coin completely. That analogy got away from me, but yeah, I think that's where it is. I think, I would love to see a third party come, and I would love to see Bernie lead the, initial stages of it and build it out with his policies and his agenda. But I don't think that they're going to have any meaningful power in 2 years or 4 years or even 6 years. It's going to be a very slow build for people to have enough faith in that party to not feel it's another throwaway vote. They're going to have to start winning local and state elections, and then they're going to start putting candidates in Congress, and then potentially make a run for the presidency. But that's going to be years out. That's what I mean. In 2024, when I don't see any situation where we are in any better position politically. You may have people that are outraged. You may have people that are fighting back against these occupations of cities and things like that. You may have more action on the ground, but I don't know if that will be enough to counteract what's happening at the political level, what is happening within the system. I think right now we just have to hold our noses and reduce the harm that's being done so that we have a fighting chance of continuing that for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I do understand the concern and legitimate positioning of harm reduction. For me, the two questions that it presents are how much harm and to whom, and again, but especially when you were talking about the delta between the two, because I think the biggest harm that Donald Trump has done to the country has been institutionally. I think that he has thrown open many of these quote-unquote sacred American institutions and shown what they really are, which are platforms for con men who hide it better than Trump. So, and I think it exposes that, and it exposes it that in a way that nobody can ignore. But when you're talking about the harm that he's really doing, right? You can make the claim that he's harmed the community that overlaps the trans community and in the military community. So trans people in the military, by not allowing them to be in the military, which I think actually the military didn't actually do, or something like that. Like there was actually pushback by the military saying, no, it's cool, we're cool with it. But I think you can specify specific groups and frankly, like smaller groups in which there have been significant harm that you probably wouldn't have under the Biden administration, right? For the political purposes and the kind of games that Donald Trump plays with executive orders and those kinds of things, playing social games. So you can identify some harm reduction in terms of that. But I think when most people are talking about the harm that Donald Trump is causing, it's not really to like communities at large, you know. I mean, maybe in terms of his language and the way he, but in terms of, again, you can make a claim about the budget, but you know, Joe Biden is still going to oversee massive military spending. It isn't going to change anything like that, and is still going to engage in all kinds of foreign and secret wars, and is going to continue mass surveillance of people here at home, and is, you know, going to continue 90% of the same policies. And so we're talking about, again, harm reduction for who, how many, what's the delta between them? I don't find it, I guess I know that there is one, so even if we're talking about just pure 100% like calculation, do what is least harmful, vote for Joe Biden. If that's the baseline position that a person has, and you can, fine, do that. But I think that sometimes there's more to it than the basic calculation of harm reduction.
I mean, I would argue that the tangible harm is probably a little bit more significant than only the trans ban in the military. I mean, I would say
I didn't say only, but yeah.
Yeah, but there. I mean, the calculable or the measurable harm is definitely felt in immigrant communities, people of color, like you said, between the language and the enabling of the racism, all of these things,
sure,
is very tangible. The erosion of education under, you know, his cabinet, the suppression of healthcare under religious and faith-based policies, things like that. All of these have a benefit, have a tangible harm to our society. Yeah. Again, it may be harder to quantify, but there is significant harm. And again, I'm not saying that the Democrats or Joe Biden is a solution to much of any of this, but it is undeniable that the harm would be less. It would be measurably less.
Yeah.
In that sense. So again, I get it. I know that if Biden wins the election, people are gonna get complacent, as you said. They're gonna go, oh, okay, it's back to the way it was before, and the way before wasn't great. It pretty much sucked too. It was terrible for many reasons. But I just, like I said, when I try to take the longer view on it, when I try to think of, okay, well, let's say either candidate wins, what does 2024 look like? What does 2022 look like for the midterms? You also have to consider the possibility that Trump is just as senile as Biden, and he may not survive his second term if he were to win. So then you have Mike Pence, who, by all accounts, is worse in many ways. And again, I mean, he has a much more. He actually believes in something. He is not just an empty vessel as Trump is. So he would certainly push harder for his religious agenda, and again, that would do a lot of harm in a lot of communities. So that alternative doesn't really seem very good either. I think, like I said, I think I'm not endorsing a vote for Joe Biden to say it's going to fix everything. I'm saying it is imperative to reject Donald Trump resoundingly, to show that he loses a popular vote by many, many millions, not just a couple million like he did to Hillary. And I think that, you know, if you vote and you choose not to vote for Biden, I think that that number becomes diluted, and it becomes harder to make that point. It makes it harder to say this was a definitive rejection of Trump. I think that is an important statement that needs to be made in 2020. And then we need to work on how to get rid of the Democrats or fix the rest of the system.
Which is it's the anybody but argument, right?
And I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I mean, I remember right after Trump got elected, you know, all of those vote blue fundraisers and PACs. Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't know who the candidate is, just give us money. Like, that's shitty as hell. I totally agree.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, just trying to take the longer view on it, I think that might be a very unfortunate but necessary evil right now.
There's a part of me that still has that accelerationist kind of bent, that I think the damage that is going to be done by a lack of like fundamental change relatively soon and immediate is the harm that we're talking about there, and the damage that comes from that is long and deep and serious. And so there needs to be an event, a flashpoint, a kind of holy fuck moment where everybody goes, things have to change big time. They cannot be the way that they were. And you need those events to spark up the kind of the fuse that will eventually result in some kind of fundamental change. And I think that that a defeat of Joe Biden by Donald Trump may very well be that thing that would change totally how you would see the political landscape in 2022 and 2024. Because take the Republican Party, for instance. The Republican Party, like, starts in the late 1850s, and by 1860 elects Abraham Lincoln, because they were able to differentiate themselves from the Whigs and the Democrats by saying they were anti-slavery, but pro-union. And so, like, oh, well, fucking, okay, this is different. And, like, we desperately need something different because the Whigs are bullshit and the Democrats kind of are too. So we needed something that works. And, I mean, at that time, you have cataclysmic events that are a result of a slave system that is marking half of the economy of the country. And so it's different kinds of sparks, but sparks nonetheless that can energize very quick change that fundamentally has long-term fundamental changes, to come at it. So, I mean, I think we have historical examples of these historic moments where change is necessary, and it takes some kind of cataclysmic event in order to be the tipping point that kind of moves the needle. And if Joe Biden doesn't move the needle, I think, yes, Donald Trump digs the needle in deeper, but Joe Biden doesn't really move it. We're in the same place that we were. And like you said, it wasn't very great. And there are worldwide consequences to the kinds of inactions that were even happening under the best of a Democratic administration, like, the Obama administration. And so I think that I maybe am naively positive about the effect that would have on people today, going, Jesus, we need something different. What we desperately need for the left, but for the United States of America and for the rest of the fucking world, frankly, is for the Democratic Party to fail in a way that they cannot recover from, because then no matter what, something else comes in its ashes, and I think that thing could come pretty fucking quick, and it could look like what we want to build, and I think that we would benefit from that, and I think that it will. What could take you 2 years under the second Trump presidency will take you 10 under the Joe Biden and whoever comes after it presidency. And so it just feels like if we're pumping, Trump pumps coal into the fucking furnace and Joe Biden closes it, and I think we want to keep shoveling in coal. Like, maybe I sound too much like a teenage anarchist, but I want. It's like the thing is on fire. It's an emperor's new clothes, or not new clothes, like emperor has no clothes moment, right? It's like everybody knows the whole thing is fucked up and stupid, and it doesn't work, and it's a joke, and most people don't vote, and it's a giant shit hole. But we were like, oh no, this is really super important, guys, and like the future of the republic is at stake, and all this kind of like mumbo jumbo bullshit. The thing is on fire, and we should all go, hey, this building sucks, let it burn. But this feels like, oh my God, it's on fire, like somebody come save it. And who's gonna save it? Uncle Joe. It just both it hits my disgust bone. It makes me go, ugh. Like, we can't afford to slow down because Joe Biden came to our rescue, and that's what it's going to be. There is going to be, and I think it's when Joe Biden gets elected, he might as well be carried aloft on Pennsylvania Avenue in a Roman triumphal parade, because it's going to feel like that for the Democrats and for a lot of people that I live around and that you live around, who are well-meaning liberals, but but pine for the good old days of Barack Obama, where there was historic deportations and the murder of American citizens by drones and all of these kinds of things that are really horrible. But man, it feels good when it's not Donald Trump doing that kind of stuff. It just, I just want to let it burn. And I don't know, like, again, maybe it's naive or something, but whenever I hear like this thing is worth saving, it is really like, to me, like, no, this is a total loss. We let the fucking archives burn and the Constitution burn with it. Like, it's dumb. Let's start over. And a way that we can get there, or at least a way that we can light the spark that leads to that kind of fundamental change, is to continue to expose the ineptitude of our so-called saviors and the failure of the institutions to prevent against essentially a madman wreaking havoc in the strongest administration in the fucking planet Earth. I don't know. That is deep down how I feel, and I don't know. Dissuade me of this feeling.
I don't know that I can dissuade you. I think all I can say is that it's a massive gamble, and if you are gambling incorrectly, the consequences will be dire. I think that's what it comes down to, right? I think you certainly have a more optimistic notion of what will happen when this inevitable collapse of the Democrats and of the country and whatever that may be happens. Whereas I, being much more of a cynic and a pessimist, definitely don't see the left somehow usurping power from the ruins of the Democratic Party, or from the ultimate decay of American institutions. I just don't see that. I think that My personal philosophy is that nature is inherently fascist, and I think that in times of uncertainty, we gravitate towards fascism. I think we've seen that globally and over the last 4 years. I mean, I think that's what gave rise to Trump. And I think that as we increase instability in that system, I think we will see more people resort to right-wing and fascist ideologies as kind of as a safety, as a, you know, security mechanism. So I don't know that I would be confident in believing that if the Democrats lose in 2020, then everyone's just going to give up on the Democrats and they're going to build power for a radical left and they're going to suddenly win everyone over. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do. That's what Bernie tried to do in 2016. That's what he tried to do this time around, is to build that support in a not very radical left, just kind of a marginally, slightly more to the left ideology. And he clearly wasn't able to do that. Like I said, yes, he was sabotaged. He was sabotaged by the Democrats and by the institutions that he, you know, was going up against, but he still ultimately failed to do that. And that's not going to change over the next 2 or 4 years. People are not going to get so fed up that they're going to suddenly switch over to that belief just because the Democrats failed to run 2 different candidates. I don't think that would be the outcome.
Why not? I don't like that. It seems totally plausible to me. And I like, okay, maybe it boils down to a difference of optimism versus pessimism, but I don't like this. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 motivated a lot of people. Why would 2020 be different? This exasperation thing, I guess I don't totally get. Like, it's not. There's a sense in which it would be the same if Donald Trump gets elected. Everybody just goes, we're fucked, right? And there's nothing I can do about it, and I'm going to be in malaise for 4 more years until something happens. That's one option. Then the other thing is Joe Biden gets elected, and everybody goes, fucking, thank God Donald Trump's not in office. I'm going to take a fucking break. And it's 4 more years. You know, and so where you find yourself at the end is not fundamentally that different.
I think it's different because like I said, I think in 2016 and 2017 after the election, people, progressives, leftists, and liberals kind of exerted a lot of energy trying to empathize with the people that voted for Trump. I think they tried to basically, you know, justify his election and try to kind of say, you know, he misled these people. He brought himself and deceived them with this image that he had as being a populist. But to have those same people, or to have enough people vote for him in 2020 after seeing what that has done for the past 4 years, I think that will disillusion a lot of people. I think a lot of people will become disenchanted with politics completely, and they will essentially give up. They go, what is the point? What are we fighting for? And like I said, I mean, I'm probably projecting a little bit because this is a struggle I personally have all the time. Like, I don't disagree with you. I feel the same way. I'm like, fuck all of this. Let's burn it down and start over. But the pragmatist in me just doesn't see that as being viable. I don't see the United States being able to do that, or to be able to hit the reset button like that. I like to believe I'm a revolutionary, but I think that, like I said, as I get older, maybe the pragmatist in me just thinks that we have to be a little bit more of a reformist, because the alternative just probably would not go in our favor. I don't think a radical revolution would favor the left. I think it would definitely favor the right, and it would put us in a much worse position.
All right, I'm just going to reach for my Rosa Luxemburg, and then I'm going to quote you to death. No, like, I understand that, and I do think there is an important place for a pragmatic kind of decision making, and I understand the pragmatic line of argument, but it assumes certain things. This pragmatist argument, right? It assumes that the system is. That I mean, in some ways, yeah, it assumes at the base level that the system is pragmatic. That the smart choice is to maintain the system. Right? Now, it's obvious that part of the reason for that is there is actually no alternative. We can't think of a kind of alternative and present that as a new view. So if you can't go anywhere, you go where you can go, and so this is what it is. But that isn't all that there is, and it is, at the end of the day, a veneer and bullshit and fundamentally illegitimate. And so why give it the position of like the valid position of being considered as part of a pragmatic decision? It's fundamentally illegitimate, and it doesn't work, and it creates all kinds of perverse incentives, and it does all of these terrible things. Why not take the staunch position that any participation in it, frankly, is giving it credit it doesn't deserve?
I guess that I would say that I think that the modern world is much more precarious and much more delicate than a lot of us like to think. And I think that any kind of massive disruption on that level will result in a lot more harm. And that's kind of where the pragmatist in me tries to think about that harm reduction element of it. I think that I agree with you. Again, I think the system is fundamentally flawed. It is flawed. Its premise, its foundation is rotten. But I don't know of a way to be able to fix that or to address it without causing massive harm if we try to do it in kind of a one fell swoop. If we allow things to deteriorate to the point where we can come in and stage some kind of a, not a violent revolution, but just some kind of revolutionary action, I think that will result in a lot of instability. And as I said, I think my personal philosophy is that nature swings right when things get unstable. I don't see that ending well for us, but I also think that regardless of which way it ends, it will cause a lot of harm nationally and globally as the system becomes unstable and the powers that be try to retain the power that they have. I think it will cause a lot of harm. And I just don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like the argument against revolutionary change.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you cannot, the system as it exists, because it is fundamentally flawed, the harm reduction of its maintenance is greater to me than the harm reduction in its, and I'm not going to say total, because of course we're not talking about the total destruction of everything existing, but of the at least basic fundamental principles of the current order, right? And those are basic things. The most basic being the dictatorship at work and the employee-employer kind of relationship. That you talk about changing some of those basic fundamental things about human relationships to each other and to how they do things, and you'll have this reverberating effect that can, I think, mitigate quite a bit of the harm reduction that may come from a more destructive idea of just like letting the system deteriorate. But I think when it comes to the 2020 election, you have a moment where the system is deteriorating and showing its flaws and allowing everyone to see that. And so I think for a lot of people, there is what is the alternative to this? Where can I go to find something that isn't this garbage? And you'll see like a rise in this whole idea of like game B, which is just to say that the current status quo system is game A. And so what we need to make is game B. And like, to me, that sounds an awful lot like Marxism and the idea that we've identified a game A and it's the capitalist mode of production. And we just want to adopt a game B, which is the communist or socialist and or communist mode of production. And so we're just talking about the mode of production. Fuck, we're not talking about the other pillars on which society is based. You're not going to change architecture or the internet or anything like that. Just who owns and controls the internet and all of these kinds of things. And so I think those are revolutionary things that will have long-term reverberating effects that can mitigate the long-term damage of the system maintaining as the status quo. And I think, I think the election of Joe Biden is going to be a maintenance of the system in a way that is going to preclude moving in a different direction. And I think that Donald Trump maintains fissures that force people to question everything about the status quo. And they should, because that allows a lot of people to look for alternatives. And for us, I think on the left, it's our obligation to, in that moment, show them the alternative or provide them the alternative. And so again, I think in what would inevitably be the collapse of the Democratic Party in the wake of the defeat of Joe Biden, you have this moment of DSA, basically, frankly, to be able to say, come to us, and we're going to start a new party that's going to make fundamental change to this country. And if you want fundamental change to this country, and we're talking about to the whole country, join us, and we're going to do it. And we're going to do it in a democratic way, and we're going to represent your interests, and we're not going to be corrupt, and we're not taking money from anybody. We're doing this the right way. That organization wins handily in any election, in damn near any election it goes to. Maybe not in, super racist Alabama or some bullshit, but like there's going to be some hardcore places that are going to be blue and red. But if there's a pink in there, it's going to change everything. And I think it hurts that movement to have Joe Biden elected. And so this is in some ways, for me, the argument to vote for Trump from the left, honestly. But I am saying all this in the context of being fairly certain that Joe Biden is going to get elected, because Donald Trump is not popular and probably will get destroyed.
But that's what we thought in 2016, and that's where I have the issue with your individualist approach to it. Again, I understand. I as a leftist, I am an idealist by definition. So I recognize that the symbolism of casting a protest vote is important about what that represents about your rejection of the system. But if there are enough people that think like you, and I believe there are, then that has the potential to not make it such a certain win for him. That's what I mean. We thought the same thing in 2016. Yeah, Hillary sucked too. She was a corporate Democrat and had all the same issues that Biden did. But we were all fairly confident that, she was going to win. And to your point, the status quo is going to kind of keep continuing. And that's a threat. I mean, you're right. I mean, that would have fundamentally altered the course of leftist organizing over the last 4 years, right? Donald Trump definitely helped in some regards, but regardless of the organizing that occurred, I think that the net change or the net effect of it has been negative, has been sliding the country further to the right. And I just don't know. I don't feel like we're as near as collapse as you may think we are. And I think that's the problem. Is I think that the powers that be are still going to be there in 2024. They're still going to be dumping money and resources into maintaining the status quo. And we may continue to lash out. We may continue to organizing it better at it, at fighting it. But we're just not going to be in a better position at that time. Having Biden win may make some people complacent. It may have some people drop out that were very eager to beat Trump. But realistically, those are not the people that are putting in the most effort and energy anyway to changing the system. So how big of a loss would that really be?
I was gonna, it undercuts the next question I was gonna ask, which is how many people do you think would have joined DSA if Hillary Clinton had been elected? I guarantee you, not as many as did.
Absolutely.
So, but like you're saying, maybe the people that would have joined DSA would have been the right people.
Well, like I said, I think the calculus is just different. I think the shock of 2016 had its moment in time. It had a definitive effect, and like I said, it was advantageous to leftist organizing at the time. But I don't see a 2020 win having that same effect. That's ultimately what it comes down to. I see it as being validation for everyone that supported Trump, everyone that has supported everything that's happened in the last 4 years. 150,000 dead Americans because he tells his people not to wear masks. Like, it validates all of that. And I think that people will be more repulsed by that than they will be energized to keep fighting for another 4 years, to see that all of the effort they put in the last 4 years can't even get this motherfucker out of the White House, right? I think it's disenchanting to see that. I think that's the problem.
Disenchanting towards the Democratic Party and the traditional liberal left that so desperately needs to die.
I don't think people will distinguish between them. Honestly, I think people will be disillusioned. Like I said, when I think about the failures of American politics, it's the Democrats, but it is much more largely the entire system, and it is the people as well. I feel disdain towards my fellow countrymen when I think of how easily they can be manipulated, how easily they can how much empathy they can lack, or how apathetic they can be towards the other issues for other people. And that's what I mean, is that's why it makes it hard for me to continue organizing. And it may be a fringe case. It may just be me. Again, like I said, I'm sure I'm projecting some of my cynicism, but this is what I see and this is what I struggle with. And I can tell you personally that if Trump wins in 2020, it will hurt. It will hurt me personally, and I will continue to question whether it makes sense for me to keep fighting to save America, because maybe we get what we fucking deserve.
But you're not taking into account. I mean, that there's a phrase I've said in some ways ad nauseum to people that know me, which is, you shouldn't blame individuals for a system's fault. The system is what's bad, and it makes bad people, and it makes people that are disinterested, and it makes people that are very, like, information confused, and it's very difficult. It doesn't have a good sense-making structure, and it has all of these perverse incentives to create all of these bad sense-making structures, and especially with like social media and all that kind of stuff, it just exasperates an already existing problem. And so this is the consequence of a perverse organization, a perverse societal system. And so it's not that people are fundamentally flawed and are going to, engage in this kind of irreverent and irrational behavior forever. They are going to make good decisions when they aren't terrified, bored, disengaged, or distracted. And I think the system does all those things. And so, the perspective of saying that maybe people are just fucked is the kind of perspective that, a bad evolutionary psychologist will do. They say, like, well, we're just designed this way, and like in some ways, even to your position, like, yep, nature's fascist, so like people be fascists. And it's like, nah, man, people are fascists because a system that is fundamentally flawed and irrational breaks down and hasn't given them the education or the ability to make sense of anything. And so they are easily distracted and organized into things that give their life meaning, because the system and their jobs and their whole existence has no reason to be. And we've in the 21st century, we had 2 world wars that destroyed religion and rationality. So we've been living for 50 and 60 years in this irrational, like, totally chaotic system that hasn't had any real grounding, justification, or meaning as part of it. And so you have generations of people for whom meaning was maybe found at the church, and now you've had 2 or 3 generations where it wasn't even found there. So, like, of course people don't give a fuck and want to say fuck you and don't believe anything they're told and only believe things that touch them in the way in the ways that communicate meaning. It's the system's fault. It is a system that creates these kinds of dynamics in people, and so we can't blame the individual or somehow feel as if they're lost simply because they're doing exactly what the system they live in is designed to produce them to. I mean, we are fundamentally creatures that are incentive-seeking, pattern-seeking, African apes. So like we have this potential in us to be greedy and capricious and tribal and all those kinds of things. But we also have this amazing capacity to be cooperative and you know, engaged with one another and seeking meaning together. And we build different systems that pull those kinds of things in and out of us. And what we've, as human beings, have developed for a long time, like 15 to 17,000 years, we've been building systems that have made it really difficult for the individual to find meaning in the here and now. They've only been able to find it in religion or in psychedelic experiences or in something like that. And I think that we've progressed as a thinking species to the point where we realize that we're all going to die one day, and so there is nothing beyond it. And so making the here and now meaningful is really, really important. But we still exist in a structure that has that old feature where you thought meaning was after you died. And so we need to change the system so that people's lives are meaningful now. Otherwise, they are going to go fascist, and they are going to go in a way that they're not going to wear a mask even though there's a pandemic. Because, and if we don't change those incentives, which are deeper than Joe Biden, deeper than Donald Trump, that is like, we're totally and wholly fucked. And so I think that, like, for me, that's like at 30,000 feet how I sort of feel. And then where it descends down, it's like, what is the impediment to progressing beyond the current system? The system's apparent stability and strength. And so if I want to progress beyond it, and the biggest hindrance is its perceived strength and stability, then my goal is instability and weakness. And so it competes with immediate concerns of harm reduction. But ultimately, the harm caused by the maintenance of the system, widespread to our existence in the here and now, is less. If you're making the bet, you bet on the big breakdown and the big ability to move beyond it, and the getting rid of the biggest impediment to doing so. And so that's the meandering philosophical justification for the accelerationist position that I kind of hold, and the fuck you position, because again, it is a gaping wound, but I don't want to I don't want to fix the wound. I want the patient to die. And I think if the patient lives, cauterizing the wound will allow the patient to survive and potentially not do the damage to if it died in the immediate. But in the long term, it's worth it. And that's pretty tough, because you're talking about essentially sacrificing the now for the later. But you know, like, it will sound trite, I guess, but deep down inside, the revolutionary inside of me says that's the bargain. That's the decision you make. You say, I want a systems change, and if that means that it's going to fuck up people's day and even fuck up people's lives, there may be a justification for that in terms of the good you're going to cause. And this is where everyone who listens to Jordan Peterson goes, holy fuck, he's talking about gulags. But I'm not, they're not talking to that extreme, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. Yeah, look, there's absolutely a part of me that agrees with you. There's absolutely a part of me that sees the appeal of that. I think the disconnect is simply in our estimations of the harm of the current system versus the harm of a massive revolution. A revolution of the scale that would have the effects that I think you are hoping it would have. I think that's what it comes down to. And I mean, I think, I know the whole point of this conversation was to talk about Biden, so I know we're kind of getting really off track here.
Yeah.
But I think that's just it. I mean, I think without really defining what that looks like, it's hard to estimate what that harm is and which one ultimately brings you out on top. I agree. The current system needs to go, and that is going to cause instability and disruption and all of those things at some point, whether it's now or later. But I also feel like there has to be a more pragmatic way of doing it to minimize that, and also to ensure that the reconstruction is in our favor as leftists, because I don't think that's guaranteed. I absolutely don't think that's guaranteed.
No, I completely agree with you. Like my interest in seeing the weakness and instability is only in some ways to exploit it, not to let it burn for all eternity, but to kind of like let the guts burn, and we'll leave the outside, and we can build upon what's good about the current system, because it's not as if it's all bad, that there are good things. We are talking about having the decision to vote and not living in a place in which the vote it legitimately doesn't matter.
Sure.
Now, we can still make the argument as to whether it does matter ultimately in America. But if you like, to me, Joe Biden as a candidate, part of me felt like that was a discussion we didn't even need to have. Like, in terms of, I think that Joe Biden is a snake. He's a really terrible politician. He's like a neoliberal's neoliberal. He totally exploits the fact that he was the first black president's vice president, especially with black people, and it's really weird and like condescending.
I get it. I totally get it. I mean, I think even his commitment to picking a female person of color for his running mate is problematic in itself, right? It puts an asterisk on that. It makes it a diversity hire at best. Like it. I get it. That's what I mean. I'm not here to endorse Biden or the Democratic Party in any way. I don't think that they are a solution to anything, but I still personally maintain that it is important to stop the bleeding and give us a chance to not have to be so reactive to everything that Trump is doing and will continue to do for the next 4 years, to give us a chance to stabilize. And you're correct that we will lose some support. People will become complacent. People think we're back in the good old Obama days or whatever. But I think it's important for us to not have to be so reactive, to try to give us some breathing room to kind of figure out what the next meaningful steps are to build power in a way that competes with the Democrats and the Republicans and offers people a viable alternative. Yeah,
again, I understand that completely. I think the thing for me is the vote for the going into the booth and actually marking down Joe Biden, knowing who Joe Biden is and what he represents, to me feels shitty. Like, in a very visceral way, it's just like, ugh, this is such a dire moment in the history of America with the coronavirus and the consequences that are going to come out of it, and the person that you have, and the vote we're all casting is, we both want to say fuck you. I get, like, you want to make sure that we say a big fuck you to Trump.
Yep.
And I want to say fuck you to both of them, because I think they're both corrupt. Here's a tangent, but Burisma, like the whole thing of why there was the Ukraine, Rudy Giuliani trying to get dirt on Joe Biden, like, because Donald Trump knew Joe Biden was going to be the nominee, and he wanted to get shit on his son being like on the board of some Ukrainian oil company.
Right.
And like, why the fuck is Joe Biden's son on the board of a Ukrainian oil company? Does he know oil? No, he's just there as a corrupt motherfucking hire, so they have a direct line to the vice president. So it's corrupt, and it's like obviously corrupt, and ain't nobody talking about it until that first debate. Like, this is one thing that now, if we're just talking like inside insider politics or whatever. The first debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Donald Trump is going to bring up Burisma. And what is Joe Biden's comeback? What is he going to say? Because everybody in terms of the discussion now we have not talked about one of Joe Biden's obviously corrupt situations. So when it comes to being confident that Joe Biden will be the nominee, I don't know. There's a lot of people that might think he's really corrupt and terrible, which he is. But I guess all those people are not going to vote for Trump. So that just makes Biden lose by, in the same, like you're saying, in the same way that that Hillary lost, because a bunch of people who probably should have voted for her didn't vote for her.
Right.
I don't know, man. I still think that it's bad. It's bad that he's corrupt, and it's bad that Trump has that dirt, and Trump got impeached over it. But now he's got that in his back pocket, and like, I just don't get why they went for Joe Biden. Like, what a terrible candidate. That's like, he's a terrible candidate. I don't think he's. He must be a really nice guy. Like, Bernie likes him, you know? He must be, like, fun to hang out with. But he definitely did, you know... Yeah, I mean, he definitely did some inappropriate things, you know, with women. And he's very creepy and he's very senile. And, like, it scares me that we don't even know who's going to take his place when he inevitably croaks.
Right.
When he's in office. So, like, that... Everyone's going to vote for somebody they don't even know who's going to really be president. This is fucked. I mean, this whole thing is fucked up. It makes me think that the system isn't worth participating in. And that's, I mean, I don't want to feel intransigent, I guess, you know? Because, like, I get it. I wouldn't tell someone not to vote for Joe Biden. Let me put it that way. The title of this episode is not going to be "Don't Vote for Joe Biden," right? Like, because I get it. Like, I don't misunderstand your position, and the pragmatism of it does make some sense to me. But again, given a certain set of presuppositions, of which I think you and I do kind of disagree, ultimately. Like, I'm willing to say "fuck you" now. And even willing to risk it, because I think I also am a little bit more optimistic about what would happen in after the re-election of Donald Trump. I still think it would be better than I'm too rose-colored glasses, but I think it'd be better. I think it would be like, it wouldn't be fine. It'd be really fucking frustrating, and it'd be really annoying, and and a lot of people would be really upset. But again, I think that would kick a lot of people in the ass. I don't agree. I think you gotta stop being so negative about your fellow Americans, because socialism is American as apple pie, and we should be like, that's something Michael Harrington said, you know, DSA motherfucker. Like, he was like, we gotta be American, you know, just not the imperialist bullshit fascisty Americans, but like, you know, we like Woody Guthrie and folk music and fucking, you know, wouldn't mind waving the flag if it didn't mean invading other countries. You know, if it really meant democracy and equality and freedom and all that good shit. Like, those are the high ideals that we socialists are all fighting for. And we just have to find a way to communicate to all the people who are not wearing masks and all this kind of stuff that, like, you're pointing your middle finger the wrong place. You know, it's not at the CDC. It's at the heads of Walmart. You know, it's not at the guy working at Walmart. It's the people who run the show. And I think, as bad as Donald Trump is, it does afford us, his presidency does afford us the ability to have those conversations in a way that I think a Joe Biden presidency wouldn't. So, I remain in some ways agnostic, and agnostic in a way in which I will still not get the willies by putting like the little mark next to Joe Biden. Like, ugh. Joe Biden and whoever the fuck. Like, I still think it's shitty for sure. It's shitty. It doesn't feel right.
I get it, but So maybe this is where that distinction that you mentioned earlier about kind of not blaming the people for the system. I think that's also where we differ. I mean, you kind of talk about the Democrats picked Biden, but the Democrats are the people. Are you registered as a Democrat? Did you vote in the primaries?
I voted in the primaries, and then I immediately changed my affiliation.
Okay.
Back to independent. I was a Democrat to vote for Bernie.
Yeah.
So I voted for Bernie,
Okay.
and then I immediately withdrew.
That's fair.
I also voted in the DC primary because that's the elections that matter in the local elections. So there's a strategic element to being a member of the Democratic Party so that you can vote in the only election that matters. But I still will vote the voters I care for more at large, and instead of the people that actually represent mine. But that's like local politics and stuff like that. That's particular to DC. I think in actually a lot of cities where the Democrats actually run everything. So you got to be a Democrat to vote in the primary to make any kind of difference because everybody's a motherfucking Democrat.
Right.
But I'm not a Democrat. Let's put it that way, right? I certainly don't consider myself a member of the Democratic Party, even if I was enrolled in the Democratic Party for the purposes of voting in the primary.
Sure.
So yeah.
No, that's fair. I mean, I did not. I was not pragmatic enough to do that to enroll as a Democrat simply for that purpose. And again, I mean, I don't pretend to know what progressives and leftists at large did, but I assume that a lot of us. I mean, we have this disdain for the Democratic Party. It's what you've been talking about this whole time. We don't see the Democrats as being allies. We see them as being part of the enemy. Yeah. And so it's just strange to me that we
you want to vote for them.
Because I think it's strange to try to vote punitively against them when you hold so much disdain for them and they did the thing that you should have expected them to do, which is to reject the candidate that is not truly a Democrat and pick a Democrat. And yeah, maybe they picked the shittiest Democrat, and I don't know what the reasons are for that. But again, to say that they picked them, that's the point I was trying to get to. To say that they picked them is to deny the fact that Biden won most of the primaries. Like, the people voted for Biden for whatever reason. Yes, they tipped the scales in his favor. Yeah, he called in support from Obama, who told the other candidates to drop out. All of these things are, true. But at the end of the day, people still voted for him. They didn't vote for Bernie. They didn't vote for Elizabeth Warren or anyone else. So how do you make that distinction? How do you say that the system is responsible for it when it's ultimately the people that were influenced by the system, but it was the people that made that decision?
I again think that the quote unquote system provides so many perverse incentives for people to. I mean, the irony is that the philosophy underlying the sort of the classical economic system that people are operating on as the sort of operating system of our economy suggests that people are rational. Right. And the system that is at the foundation of the actual economic system produces irrationality. And so I think that voting patterns among people are highly irrational because the incentive structure around them is also highly irrational. In terms, if your desired outcomes are stability, harmony, cooperation, ecological health, all those kinds of things. If those are your goals, the incentive structure is completely warped, But if your incentive structure is massive extraction of value from everywhere that you can find it, and having a docile labor force in order to be able to extract that value, then there's every incentive to make sure that people do not have a rational sense-making structure. And so, I think the consequence of that is a lot of people making fundamentally irrational decisions because they're not engaged in rational discourse. And so you can't really blame or misunderstand people who do things that don't make any sense because they're not operating with the same software, And so that makes me sad, but it also points the the direction, the finger in the sort of direction, that the ultimate cause for this is the system which benefits from the fundamentally flawed incentives. And so it just goes back to a fundamental criticism of the system. They shouldn't participate in and vote for, you fucking pussy. No, I'm just kidding. It's like the 80s. He's like, just don't be lame, man, and don't vote for president. Vote for yourself. That's how I voted for myself one time for president. Yeah, because I was like, see, again, like there's part of me that doesn't take it seriously because I don't really see the difference. Right. You're talking about people that are fundamentally on the same side when it comes to 90% of the stuff. So Trump looks worse and Trump is worse, but Trump is just the worst version of the same thing. And so I can't argue against the harm reduction, though. That you have me. If that's the baseline for anybody listening, if your baseline is harm reduction, vote for Joe Biden, because I can't win on that one. But sometimes you gotta crack a few eggs to, make an omelet. And I know that's got a dubious sort of history in terms of its applicability, but I don't think that it's fundamentally flawed in terms of what it means.
Right. That's fair. I mean,
yeah.
I don't have any more arguments for you. I mean, I would implore your listeners to hold their noses and vote on November 3rd, and then get out there on November 4th and throw all the Molotovs you want, whatever it is you feel like you need to do to bring about the revolution. That's fine. But yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important that as a nation we reject what's happened in the last 4 years, and I think the only way to do that is to make sure that Trump doesn't win, even if that means we're reinviting the status quo, even if that means we're rewarding a antiquated political party that does not have our best interests at heart. I think, despite all of that, I think it is important to reject what's been happening, and I think the only way to do that is to make sure Biden wins.
That's completely fair. All right, cool. Well, thank you for I think, I'm not fully. Part of me doesn't really know, honestly, how to think about this stuff, and is still processing it. My initial feelings and the positions that I've taken in terms of this conversation have been ones that were fairly knee-jerk for me. It comes basically down to the deep emotion of disgust, and then builds from there. And so I think that's why I completely get it. And if you're listening and you're thinking about, if you're thinking about voting for Joe Biden, do it. Because the idea of piling on Trump and making that a big fuck you, I think, is symbolically important. So if you want to do that, vote for Joe Biden. If you want to say fuck you to everything, this is my real opinion. If you want to say fuck you to everything and not vote, fine. But if you want to say fuck you to the whole thing and not vote, just recognize that you might have an impact that you weren't expecting.
I would say that at the very least, if you don't want to vote for Biden, vote anyway. Vote for, write in Bernie, write in whatever. Show that you were willing to put in the effort. I think that's a bigger fuck you to the Democrats, is to say, hey, no, I'm rejecting your candidate explicitly, like fuck you in particular, right?
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah, don't not vote.
Yeah, vote, but if you must make a protest vote, do that. But also don't do that.
Yeah, just go vote, but don't vote for Trump.
There you go. That's fair enough.
All right, cool. All right, man. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, later, man.
All my life to find you, I can spare a bit more time right before you, till the stars no longer shine.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. This podcast is supported by listeners like you, and no advertisements or anything will ever be said. If you want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/sensiblesocialist and give today. Also, please give us a review or a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, as it greatly helps. All right. See you next time.
Nothing will keep me from time.